Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. One of the concepts stressed in the New Age movement and beyond was the power of positive thinking and intention setting. Can intention relieve chronic diseases, heal emotional wounds, prevent burnout, and facilitate success? Is there scientific and medical evidence to support this? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Dr. Greg Hammer, says that by setting intentions, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Greg Hammer is a professor at Stanford University School of Medicine, a pediatric intensive care physician, a pediatric anesthesiologist, and mindfulness expert. He has been a visiting professor and lecturer on wellness at institutions worldwide and teaches his GAIN method to medical students, residents, and fellows at Stanford. He joins me this week to share his work and his book, Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for healthcare professionals and everyone else. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Dr. Greg Hammer. Welcome, Dr. Hammer.
Good morning, Victor. Great to be with you.
And thank you for joining us. And first and foremost, our gratitude to you and all the dedicated medical and frontline professionals for all that you always do, and especially during these unprecedented times of the COVID-19 pandemic. In my mind, you are all heroic. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure to serve.
Let's begin with your path and how it led to your career in medicine and your approach to intentional and mindful living.
That's a good question. I think that for all of us, the sum of all of our experiences leads us to the present moment. So I was always a seeker. Just from the time I was a child, I just wondered what this world and this universe was all about, why we were here, what happened before we were born, what happens after we die, trying to find answers that would give me satisfaction and peace. And some years ago, I began to realize that there's nothing external for which to look, that in fact, the answers are quite simple and within each of us. So I stopped looking elsewhere and began to look more inward, and just simply had sort of an epiphany and recognized that consciousness is beautiful and we're all made of consciousness. And yes, it was just kind of an awakening. And I would thank in part my teacher, Rupert Spira, who's a teacher of Advaita or non-duality. So I've been quite involved in Advaita for the last decade or more. As far as my career in medicine, I actually was really interested in the stars and space. I would get my telescope out in the cold of Chicago winter when the sky was most clear, and put my telescope out on the driveway and look up at the stars and, subscribe to Astronomy Magazine. And then at university, I was thinking of majoring in astronomy. And then I realized that actually the universe is really modeled by the human body. And I got more and more interested in human biology and the human body in general. And I came to a fork in the road, and as Yogi Berra would advise, I took it. I actually decided to go the more practical route of medicine rather than astronomy. And I, in medical school, loved working with people in pediatric medicine. It wasn't so much the children as it was the people involved. I don't have a lot of patience for ego, and I found people that work with children tend not to take themselves quite so seriously, and I just felt a kinship. So I did a residency in pediatrics, and then during my residency, I fell in love with intensive care medicine. So At that time, doing anesthesia as a route to critical care was more practical and popular than it is now. So I did another residency in anesthesiology at the University of Pennsylvania, did fellowships in pediatric intensive care and pediatric anesthesia at Children's in Philadelphia. And I've continued to practice both, as well as have a research lab in pharmacology here at Stanford. So I have 3 jobs, and I just love it. I wouldn't have changed a thing, and I'm grateful. I do my morning GAIN meditation, and the G in GAIN stands for gratitude. And one of the first things that always comes to mind is how grateful I am for the ability to do what I do, and what a privilege it is to serve others. And stop me anytime. I feel like this is a long-winded answer, but I was out for a bit, having had back surgery, and took some sabbatical time, and I really missed most taking care of the kids and their families. And I realized that I'm certainly not going to stop doing it anytime soon. And I'm very, very fortunate to have the training and ability that I have. And so I have a wonderful job. I love my work. The work that I do in mindfulness really started several years ago with a program at Stanford called WellMD, which was convened in acknowledgement of the rising tide of physician burnout. And so I joined the WellMD program and was asked to give a talk to a national audience on burnout and wellness. And that sort of led to many more invitations, and pretty soon I was speaking about this topic around the US and around the world on a regular basis, and had some more sabbatical time, and decided to write a book. So I did, and the book is entitled Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Providers. And the GAIN is an acronym for gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And that is my daily practice. And I teach that to students, residents, and fellows, and when I give talks as well. And that's pretty much my story, Victor.
And we'll talk a little bit more about GAIN, the acronym GAIN, further down the interview. Right now, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about that personal meditation practice. How does that work for you?
Well, I realize that people talk about taking vacations to de-stress, and that may be something that they do a couple of times a year if they're lucky. And I think we can all relate to having returned from vacation, as wonderful as it was. Perhaps it took a few days for us to kind of let go of our daily stress and thinking of work and so on. And then we kind of settled into this sort of blissful state of relaxation. And then after a couple of days back at work, we feel as though the benefit of that is fleeting. And I decided that really what we need is a daily practice, rather than relying on and looking forward to intermittent breaks from the stress of daily life. And I had at the same time come to this conclusion that the 4 pillars of happiness, which is really all that the 7 billion of us on the planet want, include gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. I came to that conclusion. I thought a 4-letter acronym was good. I could remember that. I had difficulty when I studied Buddhism in university, remembering the 12 ways of this and the 10 steps to that. But 4 letters seemed reasonable. So I just derived this. I'm a meditator, and I just decided that from listening to my medical students, residents, and fellows, when I asked them what made them happy and reduce stress, they cited things like going to yoga classes and other things that they had not time for. So I thought, well, why don't I just sort of morph this meditation practice, this contemplation of GAIN, into a very short morning daily practice. And I will advise them to set their alarms 3 minutes earlier than they might have otherwise, because everyone's got 3 minutes. I don't think anyone's going to miss 3 minutes of sleep, or they can go to bed 3 minutes earlier if so. And so the morning contemplative meditation just arose from the confluence of those concepts. And it's a very simple practice. And the wonderful thing about it is that as we initially get in touch with our breath and we slow our breath down and perhaps inhale through our nose to a count of 3 and hold for a count of 3 and then exhale slowly without effort to a count of 4. And we do that a few times and find that our breathing rate and our heart rate are coming down and the adrenaline in our bodies disappearing. And then we go through a contemplation of these 4 elements of gain, starting with gratitude. And really, we can do that in as little as 3 minutes and then return to the breath. And the wonderful thing about starting the day that way, Victor, is that it gives us the readily accessible tools to do the practice throughout the day. So I might say at the end of my gain meditation, I'm going to focus on non-judgment today. And, I pledge to drop the judgment the first time it begins to arise. So, for example, for somebody who's driving to work, inevitably somebody ahead of them will change lanes into their lane without using the turn signal. And we tend to start to form judgments about this is a bad driver, they're inconsiderate, they're bad, etc. And when we notice that we're doing that, we can just suddenly realize, I had this gain meditation, the N was for non-judgment. I was in touch with sort of letting go of all judgment. And so I'm going to drop the judgment of this person. And when we do that, we got a little dopamine hit. It actually feels good. Instead of an unpleasant sensation being perpetuated, we let it go and we actually have a positive experience in the process. And so when we do the morning gain contemplative meditation, then we can more readily over time access our breath and also these 4 elements of gain. And this is a process, I think, that has a natural way of growing and becoming more and more accessible. And I think after several months, we can look back and think, I'm just so much calmer than I was. I'm so much more present than I was. And I've had several people tell me just that.
And most of our listeners are involved in meditation and yoga, and I'm grateful that you shared that because that's something that could be adapted to virtually anyone's practice.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think another thing I heard from my students and residents and fellows is that they tried meditating, but they failed. And I think they took too big a bite. They were told they had to sit in an uncomfortable position for 30 minutes and banish all thoughts from their head. And, that's just simply not true. So by offering a bite-size approach, I think that we learn in small increments and through repetition. And so, again, this daily practice as short as 3 minutes is all I'm proposing. And I've just found that resonates with a lot of people.
I had a wonderful spiritual teacher who, when I first met him, was in his early 80s. And he used to share with us that he'd wake up in the morning and he'd feel pain in his legs and he'd feel pain in his back. And he'd express his gratitude to his maker. And people would say, why do you express gratitude for feeling pain? He said, because if I felt nothing, I'd be dead and I couldn't accomplish anything. So he even expressed gratitude for pain as a reminder that he was alive for another day and had the opportunity of another day to do things in the world.
Absolutely. I think no matter what aches and pains we have, they could always be worse. And that's, kind of a funny alternative, when someone says, oh, this hurts or that hurts, my thought is, well, it beats the alternative, exactly as your teacher suggested.
Absolutely. In Gain Without Pain, you have a number of wonderful contributors who share to the book. Please tell us about a couple of those.
Sure. Well, I decided to, since I'm an academic and I edited a textbook and contributed many chapters to other textbooks in medicine, that why not take advantage of a lot of connections I have with really, really wonderful, enlightened people. So I thought that a chapter on compassion and forgiveness was important. And I also felt that I should include the elements that support our physical well-being. And therefore, I have colleagues who are experts in sleep medicine, for example, and likewise in nutrition, although I have expertise in that area too. It's my undergraduate degree. So I invited one of our well-MD nutritionists to participate. So consequently, we've got Fred Luskin, who's really a world expert in forgiveness and compassion, and wonderful contributors in sleep medicine, exercise physiology, and nutrition. Those are names that people may not have heard of, but they're preeminent in their fields. And then I invited a couple other people to kind of co-author chapters on the game elements with me. And so just taking advantage of the expertise and some of my dear colleagues and friends.
You open the book sharing a personal loss and how you faced it. Please share with our listeners about your son, Max.
Yes. Well, my beloved boy was brilliant and gifted and engaging and, kind of marched to a beat of a different drummer from the time he was 2 or 3 years old. I remember, and I have photos, I can look back on him, the way he would dress himself, and he would insist on doing that. And he would just put together the most hilarious combination of clothing elements. And that sort of expresses the way he was in life in general. And he was a brilliant musician, a pianist. And he refused to go by the book in music and in other areas. And unfortunately, when he was in high school, he started getting involved in drugs, and that sort of progressed. And through his 20s, he had various struggles, although he had various victories as well. But unfortunately, he just wouldn't accept help for his substance abuse problem, and that led to his demise ultimately at the age of 29. He was living in Portland at the time, and I was the one who was notified. And, of course, it goes without saying, it's devastating to lose a child. But I began to realize that, first of all, I did my best with him. I loved him completely and unconditionally. And as we all have experienced, with pain and suffering, we have a choice. We can either resist it and lament it, or we can embrace it. And I began to realize that by embracing this generally painful event in my life and letting it in and opening my heart to it, I actually minimized the suffering I was feeling. So I actually have a formula in the book. Since in medicine we love formulas, suffering equals pain times resistance. It sounds like a simple physics equation, but we have pain and suffering in life, both our own personal pain and suffering, and I think the pain and suffering of others around the world at present and through the centuries and millennia resonates with all of us. We all feel, I think, residual pain from the way our African brothers and sisters were extracted from their homes and their cultures and thrown into holds of boats and shipped to Europe and the United States and enslaved. We all, I think, suffer from the background resonance of wars and natural disasters and famine. And then, of course, we all suffer now, I think, from the pain and suffering caused by the pandemic, even if we ourselves are relatively spared. And so what do we do with this pain? And the suffering equals pain times resistance. Simple concept is, if we resist, and that includes, actively trying not to think about it and, sort of pushing it away and relegating it to the middle burner or back burner, we simply intensify the suffering. So the pain is there, but if we lower our resistance, that is, accept it, the suffering doesn't have to be there. And I think ultimately, if pain times resistance equals suffering, the resistance can be lowered to potentially zero. So in this way, there's pain without suffering. And so I began to look at my son's life that way, and at the same time, become grateful for the 29 years I had with him. There was never a dull moment. The guy had a big footprint. He was hilarious at times. He was entertaining at times. He was a beautiful boy. And so gratitude and acceptance, I think, are first and foremost in terms of minimizing our suffering in the face of tragedy. And we all experience pain and suffering. That is our human mortal existence.
From my personal experience and that of an interfaith minister, I know that everyone grieves differently, and especially through the loss of a child. Parents, I recognize that there's very little you can say to the parent who's just lost a child. What would you offer to them?
Well, I think if I had visual access, I would simply put my right hand over my heart and just sort of pat it gently, just indicating in a nonverbal way, I feel your pain. That's all we can do, I think. And it's similar to the experience I have with many of my patients, since I take care of critically ill infants and children. And we at Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford have a lot of rare and horrific disorders, genetic and acquired, that we deal with in the intensive care unit. I have patients that I can't really save, and they're kind of at the end of their life. And how do I deal with those families? And in many cases, they've maybe this has been a chronic disorder. They understand the medicine as well as any layperson possibly can. So I don't have to tell them about the medicine. In many cases, all I can do is simply be present with them.
Yes.
And it's remarkable, really, Victor, how, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, if we embody presence, it just sort of, in a passive way, it sort of melts away all the layers that we carry around with us and allows us just to kind of flow into this connection with other people. And if that's all at times I can offer my patients and their families, that's a win. And so, in answer to your question, how would I approach other families and individuals who experience this kind of loss? Just by being present with them, I think is all I can really offer.
Presence and the gift of sacred listening.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. My guest, Dr. Greg Hammer, his book, Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. Dr. Hammer, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
Sure. Well, I have a website, which is greghammermd.com, lowercase GREGHAMMER, MD.com. And there's a lot of media there. I assume that our discussion will be up there soon. And there's also access to the book, or one can go on to Amazon and search Gain Without Pain and my last name, which is Hammer, and they'll find the book there. And I've had a lot of people outside of healthcare read the book, and I do think that the principles are universal. So it's not just for healthcare professionals.
And we'll touch upon that in the next segment. My guest, Dr. Greg Hammer, his book, Gain Without Pain, will be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Greg Hammer. His book is called Gain Without Pain, The Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. And as we stated in the end of the last segment, it's called The Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals, but the wisdom shared really applies to everyone, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so.
And can be incorporated into everyone's life in their process.
Yes, well, I think, I've always been a physical fitness enthusiast, and that includes what I think are the three elements that form a tripod that support our physical life, and they are sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And I think the four pillars of our spiritual well-being include gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And so there are chapters in the book on each of those topics, and then putting the gain meditation together as well. So the stories are largely related to my experience in taking care of patients and their families, but really I think the principles are universal.
How may the GAIN method be used for setting intentions?
Well, we talked about gratitude and acceptance, and the I in GAIN is in fact intention. And one of my favorite teachers, John Kabat-Zinn, defined mindfulness as being aware of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. And the on purpose represents our intention, because really things don't just unfold in the way that would lead to optimum physical and spiritual health for us without our input, without our participation, our full participation and presence. And that's what intention is. And I think there's a great example of that, which is something called 3 Good Things. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a program out of Duke University. And what they've done is they've enrolled tens of thousands of people virtually who take a wellness survey that's validated. And then they sign up to think of, and if they're so inclined, to write down 3 good things that happened to them during the day. Because, we have, there's 2 elements of the way our minds work that seem to be hardwired. The first one is we have a negativity bias. So we tend to focus on the negative and forget about the positive. And the second thing I think that seems to be hardwired into our brains is that we are obsessed with the past and the future in ways that are maladaptive. So we can go into those concepts in more detail, but the 3 Good Things program addresses that. Because of our negativity bias, at the end of the day, we tend to take stock of things that didn't go well during the day. And I use in the book an example. Again, the stories are my own personal experience in medicine for the most part. I worked with a resident in the operating room one day, and we had 4 very challenging cases involving chest surgery. And she was amazing. Very skillful and bright young anesthesia resident. She did lots of procedures with these patients, putting in specialized types of breathing tubes and epidural catheters for postoperative pain control, and arterial catheters to measure blood pressure beat to beat. And everything went perfectly. First patient, multiple procedures, patient wakes up after a big operation, totally comfortable, breathing tube comes out, perfect anesthetic. Second patient, same thing. The resident could not get the little catheter into the patient's artery in the wrist, and so I stepped in and did that, but otherwise she was terrific. And the third and fourth cases went pretty much just like the first one. So just a tremendous day. We debriefed at the end of the day, and I gave her lots of kudos for her performance and her commitment. She goes home, has dinner with her husband, and she's getting ready to go to sleep at night. And she takes stock of her day. She's reviewing everything that happened during the day that made a lasting impression on her. And does she think about all the things that went well in the operating room that day, and all the ways that she helped these 4 patients? No, she actually focuses on having been unable to place that little catheter in the artery in the second patient. And that's just typical of our negativity bias. We tend to remember that one little thing that didn't go well, although it wasn't a problem, it didn't have any adverse effect on the child, and forget about all the positive things that happened during the day. So back to three good things, simply by thinking of and perhaps writing down three good things that happened during the day as we prepare to go to sleep. It doesn't take any time at all. We can do it while we're turning down the bed linens, however we wish to do it. So tonight, for example, I will think about playing with my puppy. I will have fond memories of our meeting and conversation, Victor, for which I'm grateful. And going over to meet a friend later on and going for a bike ride, and there'll be lots of other good things today. So I'll think of at least three of those things tonight. What the researchers at Duke found is that simply by the act of focusing on three good things in the evening, people sleep better and they're happier. So again, utilizing these sort of wellness or happiness surveys serially through the study. It's that setting of intention. Tonight, I'm going to focus on three good things. I'm going to take this negativity bias and through my purposeful abilities, I'm going to turn it on its head and turn it into a positivity bias through my intention. And the next time I find that I'm unhappily ruminating over something that happened yesterday or the day before, and, oh, I wish I would have done this, I wish I would have done that, find that I'm wallowing in the past and generating regret and shame and remorse, or I'm focusing excessively on the future in maladaptive ways and generating unnecessary fear and anxiety. Because of our negativity bias and our obsession with the future, we tend to catastrophize. What's the worst thing that could happen? And we focus on that, even though it rarely comes to be. So by thinking of three good things, we've kind of taken this negativity bias and turned it upside down. And it's just incredibly beneficial. So how do we maximize that? Again, it's just a matter of intention. It's setting one's intention to do the gain meditation in the morning. It's setting one's attention to commit to recognizing gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. So intention is of primary importance. That's why I included it in the acronym, because I think it's one of the four pillars of our spiritual and mental well-being.
Thank you for sharing that practice. But I have a question. I'm interested in this. Why do we have, is that negativity bias, is that something in our DNA or is it something societal that we learn?
Well, that's a great question, Victor. I think it's both, actually. I think that we can look sort of teleologically at why do we humans have various traits? Why do we walk on two legs? Why is our body the way it is, et cetera? I think having a negativity bias can actually support survival. Not so much now, but I think if we go back, through the millennia and beyond, the last 50,000 years of Homo sapiens existence, one could imagine that worrying about what might happen and worrying about what's the worst thing that could happen might actually be a survival benefit, right? Because if I'm thinking, oh my God, there's a saber-toothed tiger lurking outside the mouth of my cave, then I might take some action. I'll light a fire. I'll be prepared to stave it off and so on, even though there is no saber-toothed tiger. And I think to that extent, I think it may have been actually something that has found its way into our DNA. On the other hand, I think equally important is our environment. It's nature and nurture. It's our environment I think our lives are full of chronic stress. We can talk about the physiology of stress, which is fascinating in and of itself. But I think that this is how our existence is. We have to sort of fend for ourselves, but we dramatically overplay that. Again, there is no saber-toothed tiger. So I think this negativity bias and this obsession with the past and the future are both in our DNA, and therefore I use the term hardwired into the way we think. And they're also kind of self-propagating. Unless we use our intention to sort of let the layers fall away and get back down to our true nature, which is happiness. But again, that takes a combination of gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment practice.
And you share in your book that intentional living will manifest in changes in both the brain and the body in our lives. Please elaborate.
Yes, I mean, this is fascinating. I think, one example is that the three good things, if you practice that daily, what the investigators at Duke have found is that people have long-lasting benefits. Those who take a mindfulness-based stress reduction course for 8 weeks that is based on John Kabat-Zinn's original mindfulness program, they have lasting benefit beyond the period during which they're taking the course. So we can actually rewire the way we think. We can rewire our brains. And that is something that we have throughout our lives. And I think the more we practice it, the more we maintain that ability. And the medical term for that is neuroplasticity. That means that our brains are malleable, that we can actually actively train our minds to behave and perform in positive ways. And there are many, many examples of that we all manifest. So let's focus on those things and use our intention in positive ways. When we find ourselves mired in regret, or we find ourselves obsessing and catastrophizing over some future thing that may never happen, when we practice gain, for example, or other wellness practices, we can recognize more readily over time, hey, I'm doing this thing, and have a bit of a laugh at oneself. Why am I mired in this thing that happened a month ago? My memory's not even that accurate. I'm distorting it in a negative way. I'm replaying what I may have said during a meeting or so in a way that's actually more negative than it was at the time. It wasn't a stupid remark. It was actually an insightful remark, but I've morphed it into, I shouldn't have said that. It was stupid. When we find ourselves, we recognize this pattern, we can just have a bit of a laugh and bring it back to the present moment and to a more positive outlook. And the more we practice this through intention, the more adept we are at recognizing when we're thinking and acting in these maladaptive ways, and then we can come back to the present and a more positive way of being.
I found that manifesting in my personal life, where I used to be the type of person in a meeting of any kind, if I felt someone was wrong, I had to immediately let them know that I thought that what they were sharing was wrong and why it was wrong and so on and so forth. And I guess with my spiritual practice and a little bit of age and maturity, I came to recognize that my answer was not as important as listening to what the person was actually saying and then thinking before responding. Someone once said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Think twice, speak once. And that's something that I learned. And I learned it the hard way, but I learned it.
Yeah, well, that's a great example, Victor, of intention. You recognize that you were doing something that was maladaptive and you focused on it and you made use of your neuroplasticity, this way we can rewire the way we think. And you did that in a beautiful way. And I think we've all had similar experiences. First of all, to listen, one needs to be present. If one is formulating the answer or their response while the other person is talking, we're not really listening, we're not really present. And also, let's sense that we're being judgmental. That we're immediately snapping into judgments about what this person is saying and disagreeing perhaps. And again, the more we practice non-judgment, the quicker we recognize that we're judging. And therefore, the more quickly we can just drop the practice of judgment.
Many people set goals for themselves. Is there a difference between setting a goal and living intentionally?
That's a great question. What's the difference between a goal and an intention. A goal tends to be a kind of off in the distance, whereas an intention is more of a present-oriented phenomenon. So actually in the book, I give this example. My goal is to take my bicycle off the wall in my garage and head out into the beautiful hills surrounding Stanford where I live and reach the top of this ridge where I can look down on the ocean and have a beautiful sweeping view of the Pacific Ocean. That's my goal. So I take my bike out and I focus on each rotation of the pedal, and I gradually reach the top of that ridge, but the fog has rolled in and I don't have a view of the Pacific Ocean at all. It's just mist and fog. So one could say, if you take a negative point of view, I didn't achieve my goal. But I did achieve my intention. I utilized my intention to focus on the trip up to that ridge and all of the beauty and enjoyment and hard work and sweat that went into getting to the top of the ridge. So even though I didn't truly accomplish my goal, I utilized my intention and I had a very positive experience. So I think that intention is something that's with us along the trail, whereas what is at the end of the trail may be our goal. But I think that we all have had the realization that it's really about the journey. It's not really about the end.
Yeah.
There is no end.
Absolutely. My guest, Dr. Greg Hammer, his book, Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals and for everybody else. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and experiences connect through conversation, and it feels good.
This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together. Start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
Dad, I picked up your pills, made your lunch, and your laundry is done.
When you care for a loved one, you take care of everything. But are you taking care of yourself? Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Dr. Greg Hammer. We're talking about his book, Gain Without Pain. Dr. Hammer, when I was in business, I taught classes to sales and customer service staff on how to determine what the customer really wants. How does one discover what they truly want and set their intention?
I think, again, what all 7 billion of us want is happiness. And that is a pretty obvious or self-explanatory statement, but I think it's elegant in its simplicity and it's so obviously true. And the question is, how do we get there? I mean, it's something that is, in fact, our true nature. And in order to experience our true nature, we have to be intentional about it, because there's so many forces external to us that appear to take us away from our true nature, that distract us, that cast this negative way of thinking and this fixation on thinking of past and future and not being present. So, I honestly believe that happiness is our true nature, that we're all made of the same stuff called consciousness. And we need to be intentional in order to simply sink into that reality, because there is so much around us that otherwise seems to take us in the opposite directions.
And what advice would you offer to those who say that they set their intentions for the day, but they go astray with problems and interruptions?
Well, I think if that's the case, then one needs to reevaluate what their intentions are. And also, let's face it, our expectations are important as well. We talked before about meditation and how my trainees would often tell me that they feel like they failed. And when I ask them, why do you think you failed? They explain that they had to reposition their body frequently, and they had thoughts traveling across the landscape of their mind continuously, and they understood that they were supposed to sit still and have no thoughts. And so the expectation of having no thoughts and sitting without moving was excessive and unnecessary. So I think sometimes our intentions can kind of miss the point. That's why I've sort of derived this gain meditation as a 3-minute practice. And then, of course, people can sit and practice gain for as long as they would like, and practice it throughout the day, at least as importantly. But I think, again, with somebody who they set their intention for the day and then they fail, maybe we should reevaluate what the intention was. And maybe they were asking too much of themselves. Maybe they were taking too big of a bite. So, for example, if someone says, my intention for today is to be nothing but kind and generous and present and a good listener while I'm at work. And then they get to work and there's a lot of distractions, and maybe there's a colleague that doesn't get along with them, and it becomes impossible to be present and kind and generous. Then reevaluate what the intention was. Maybe the intention could be that I will focus when I find myself straying back on my original intention. And if I've deviated from it or appeared to have deviated from it, so what? That's not failure. That's just part of the process. It's a process. And so let's go easy on ourselves and, again, take small bites. Otherwise, part of the issue with daily practice is people feel like they fail and then they simply abandon it. So back to small bites, repeated on a daily basis, and there is no such thing as failure.
You had mentioned the 3 tiers of health being exercise, nutrition, and sleep. As a society, are we getting enough sleep? No. Partly, I think we all suffer from chronic stress to a variable degree. And, I mentioned earlier that the effects of chronic stress on our bodies are quite fascinating. While acute stress might actually be helpful in certain circumstances. So, you hear a splash and you're at a party and there's toddlers around in a swimming pool, you have an acute increase in your adrenaline and your heart rate goes up and your blood pressure goes up and your cortisol goes up, so your blood sugar rises, and that prepares you to, if necessary, jump in the pool and rescue the toddler. So that might be an adaptive response to acute stress. But when perhaps a lower grade of stress persists for days, weeks, months, years, there are many deleterious effects, including on our sleep, of course, but on our cardiovascular system. We have chronic high blood pressure, and this puts a stress on our heart, and our blood vessels have adverse changes associated with stress. On our hormonal systems,
there's a really interesting way of looking at the effects of chronic stress. It actually promotes premature aging. I call it premature because, of course, aging is a natural process, but it seems to be accelerated in many of us. If we look at the tips of our chromosomes, there are little structures called telomeres. And I liken telomeres to the little plastic tips at the end of our shoelaces that prevent the shoelaces from fraying. So these telomeres are actually protecting our chromosomes. And as we age, they get shorter and they're less effective at protecting our chromosomes. And people who are experiencing chronic stress have early shortening of their telomeres. And this can be reversed, actually, so that if those people can sink into a state of less stress, their telomeres will actually lengthen again. So you asked about sleep. I think chronic stress begets chronic stress. It's a self-propagating malady. And one of the reasons is that chronic stress interferes with natural sleep. So many of us have insomnia to a varying degree. We wake up frequently in the night. We have difficulty going back to sleep. And we may also go to bed too late, given how early we need to get up. So that's a separate problem. But yeah, I think the quality of sleep is something that is suboptimal for many people. That's why medications to promote sleep are so popular, and the use of CBD and other remedies for sleep. It's a focal point in our society because, no, we don't get enough sleep. And on top of that, the quality of our sleep is compromised by chronic stress. And another way that this is self-propagating is people who experience chronic stress often self-medicate with alcohol, and alcohol interacts with a receptor in the brain called the Gaba Receptor, GABA, which stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid. And that receptor is also the target for anesthetic drugs, like the inhaled anesthetic gases and intravenous sedative drugs like Valium-type drugs. And when that receptor is activated, it promotes unconsciousness. In other words, alcohol may help us, quote, go to sleep. But really, we're not in a state of natural sleep. We're actually, in some ways, in a state of anesthesia, where the brain waves that show us the cycles of sleep are disordered. And so we don't have normal physiologic restorative sleep when we use alcohol to help us sleep, or even if we drink alcohol in the evening. In many cases, it interferes with our sleep. Caffeine. Caffeine is something, again, that propagates this cycle of stress, poor sleep, fatigue, stress, poor sleep. Caffeine has a very long half-life. So that means that, if you have a large cup of Starbucks coffee in the morning, there's, maybe 150 milligrams of caffeine in that coffee, and that establishes a certain concentration in our blood. And then it takes about 5 to 6 hours for that concentration to be reduced by 50%. So in other words, if we have that cup of coffee at 8, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's as though we just drank half a cup of coffee with the same concentration of caffeine. And 6 hours later, when we're thinking about going to sleep soon, we still have 25% of that original caffeine concentration in our blood. And for people who are sensitive to caffeine like me, that would actually keep me up. So you can imagine how I was affected adversely by that cup I used to have after lunch. I said, well, my limit is 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but I would have that cup, and it definitely interfered with my sleep. And so, again, we deal with chronic stress in ways that sort of may propagate chronic stress. And that's why sleep hygiene is so important, because it's one of those ingredients that's continuing this spiral.
What would you like readers to take away from Gain Without Pain?
I would like to have them understand that the path to happiness is quite simple, and it takes gratitude. You can be blind and happy, you can be otherwise physically disabled and happy, you can be poor and happy, but you can't be ungrateful and happy. So gratitude, first and foremost, is a component of the path to happiness. Acceptance, intention, and non-judgment are the three others. And what I would like for people to take out of this discussion is simply that this is, in fact, a very simple practice. It is minimally time-consuming, and it is self-propagating in the sense that happiness begets happiness the same way chronic stress begets chronic stress. So I think the components that lead us toward happiness are very simple. And so I'd like for people to understand that there's really good news.
His name is Dr. Greg Hammer. His book, Gain Without Pain. Dr. Hammer, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your book and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of information on my website, greghammermd.com, GREGHAMMERMD.com. And also the book is on Amazon. And if one puts in the search window on Amazon, Gain Without Pain and Hammer, they'll find the book. So yeah, those are the ways to get in touch with me as well.
And once again, our gratitude to you and all of the other doctors and nurses and frontline professionals who have really come to the fore during this unprecedented pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Victor. It's been a true pleasure meeting you and speaking with you.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.